Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Well, coming from Washington, D.C. as a Croatian diplomat in Washington, D.C., though, I would like to start tonight's discussion on my part with a quotation, a statement from the joint statement that was issued by Presidents Medvedev and Obama on April 1st in London, when they jointly declared that they are ready to overcome the Cold War mentalities and go ahead for a fresh start in relations between the two countries. So since we're marking the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall on Monday, and actually at the end of the Cold War, we have to ask ourselves why 20 years later we're still talking about overcoming the Cold War mentality. In 1989, when President Bush, 41, visited Europe, he declared that he wanted to see Europe whole and at peace, and then the elements of that policy were threefold, as a matter of fact. That was engaging Central and Eastern Europe and integrating it into the Euro-Atlantic institutions. So, taking that part of Europe into the Western fold. Secondly, it was diffusing the crisis, especially in our region in the Balkans, or as we prefer to call it in Croatia, Southeast Europe. And thirdly, it was a new relationship. It was engaging Russia. I would say that the first two elements of that policy were successful, even though today, as Radmila mentioned, we're still talking about unfinished business in Southeast Europe. And in addition to Kosovo, I would mention Bosnia and Herzegovina as well, where certainly Russia, the European Union, and the United States will continue to play the role in further constitutional changes. The NATO and EU enlargement help Central and European countries on their way to democracy, reforms, etc. However, it proved to be detrimental and even corrosive to this relationship with Russia. However, with President Obama, with his statement and intentions of opening a new chapter and changing the whole atmosphere in the relationship with Russia, I think we have a new window of opportunity arising in 2009. And that window of opportunity really has to be used. And I would repeat what one of the colleagues already said. Russia has to be engaged. It has to be engaged more forcefully in the discussion in the context of NATO and Russia Cooperation Council. It has to be engaged in being involved in the new European security architecture. And there are a number of other areas where there is room for cooperation, such as counterterrorism, combating piracy, arms control, especially the new agreement replacing START on arms control, cooperation in Afghanistan, Iran, North Korea, and of course trade, economic cooperation and investment. And one needs to engage Russia and actually draw it with the power of public diplomacy and soft power in this world of interdependence today, so that the mutual relationship is not dependent but rather interdependent, which then sets the preconditions for cooperation between all the sides involved. Thank you. Obviously, yes, I would say that the Cold War has defined Russian-American relations forever, but there was a phase of Cold War. And some academics have already started writing about a new Cold War. I would disagree with that as well. I would agree that, yes, we cannot expect from President Obama to resolve everything. But I think that steps have been taken in the right direction. And with Hillary Clinton's visit to Moscow, the fact that they made an agreement on a bilateral presidential commission that is to identify areas of cooperation and actions needed, which comprises about 16 different working groups. There is a potential, but for every dialogue there is also need for two sides to engage frankly in that dialogue. When you look at Russia today, I would not agree that Russia is in shambles. Yes, they've been through difficulties, they've seen the Soviet Union collapse, but Russia is a major world power, and they have legitimate security concerns. Some of us may disagree with the concerns they have that NATO enlargement towards Russian borders constitutes a threat to Russia. However, that is a perception that Russia has, and most time perceptions in political life are political reality. So obviously this is something that needs to be addressed seriously by President Obama, by the United States, by NATO and the European allies that are members of NATO. And on the other hand, again, Russia needs to seize this moment and again, frankly, in these discussions, state their concerns and see how we can proceed and move forward. It's going to take years. I mean, there are going to be ups and downs, but I think that on the part of the US administration, there's this genuine desire to get things moving forward. Thank you. Just one brief comment. From the point of view of a country that's been negotiating its membership in the EU since October 2005, I can tell you that the European Union is one big family. When it comes to disagreements over Kosovo, I think they have been more noticeable and more pronounced in the Security Council rather than in the EU Russia relationship, simply because of the fact that the European Union is divided on the fact of recognizing Kosovo and how to proceed with the regional policy, and most of the discussion was in the UN Security Council. But, you know, the EU common policies, we are getting there in certain areas, but if you look at Russia policy, definitely there is not a single unified European position, again, on Russia and how to proceed with Russia. Even between the United States and the European Union or individual members of the European Union. Germany, for instance, has more of an economic state. It has invested heavily into the Russian democracy in the economic, trade, and investment sense. Whereas the United States is more concerned about strategic and geopolitical interests. So in defining their policies towards Russia, they always start off from these divergent interests. And I think this is precisely what's going to be happening with the European Union in trying to forge a common foreign and security policy on individual issues. Yes, a short comment from another neighbor. Croatia is not an immediate neighbor of Kosovo. However, we are neighbors with Serbia, and of course we're in a very delicate position, the same as Macedonia. We understand the position of Serbia and the position of Belgrade. However, Kosovo was a new reality, a new political reality that became recognized by a number of countries. Just a few facts, because the colleague who asked the question mentioned that it wasn't a viable state, etc. From the legal standpoint, Kosovo was part of the former Yugoslavia in the sense that it was an autonomous province in the Socialist Republic of Serbia. However, it did have its own borders, and it did have a representative in the collective presidency of the former Yugoslavia with the right to vote. And as far as viability is concerned, a lot of states have started out with international assistance. Again, Bosnia and Herzegovina is another example. And I think that Kosovo is on the way of stabilization, of building its institutions and a civil society as well. And certainly it will be a player in Southeast Europe. I have a comment. I mean, personally, I must say I'm a very strong supporter of NATO. And I had a privilege, actually, of delivering the instruments of ratification of our treaty, and by which action Croatia became member of NATO in April of this year. I believe that NATO has done a lot, especially for democracy in Central and Southeast Europe. NATO gave shape to the reforms that are complementary with the process of EU accession. It has firmly set human rights as the criteria for membership, and it paved the way for EU enlargement. It wasn't a rule, but it was a fact that basically countries apart from the neutral ones, such as Austria, they first became members of NATO before they became members of the European Union. And for a while we thought that we were going to become members of the EU first, but it happened that we became members of NATO. NATO is trying to redefine its role. There was, of course, a lot of suspicion within Croatia as well within our own public for the purposes of NATO, what the benefits and what the shortcomings would be. But I think what's most important is assuming responsibilities for security, not just in our own neighborhood and in Europe, but on the global scene as well. I mean, NATO has started with humanitarian operations outside of the traditional Euro-Atlantic area, and you know, who knows what the future might hold. There is a panel of wise people who are trying to restructure the future and see where it will go, but I believe that there is a strong future for NATO, and we should cease to perceive it as an arm of the Cold War, because it's proved that it has crossed the line that divided Europe, and that it has engaged very actively the new democracies in transitional processes and in taking this global responsibility. Thank you. There's always a danger in personification of policy, in the sense of trying to make countries equal, or looking at countries through the prism of people that they represent. I think that some statesmen have made that mistake. For instance, I don't know, President Bush, 41, looking at relations with Russia through his own relationship with Gorbachev or Yeltsin later. So there is always, a much broader scope than just personalities. But I would like actually to leave some food for thought when it comes to American-Russian, or rather European-Russian relationship. We often talk about energy dependence on Russia and the need for diversification of sources of energy, which of course is legitimate and what we all should be doing. But there are always two sides of a coin for every problem, and that's also for the European Union to consider. If you look at Germany, Germany imports about 37% of its supplies of oil from Russia, and 32% of gas, or vice versa, I don't remember. But if you look at Russia itself, about 90% of its exports of oil and about 70% of its exports of gas go on the EU market. So Russia also has an interest to cooperate with the European Union and to work towards making this interdependence, which I mentioned earlier in one of the comments, rather than being energy dependent. And the case is the same in many areas, but again, there are always two sides of the coin, and for dialogue you need the two, three, or more sides, and you need a cooperative engagement, and I hope that the times ahead of us will show the prospects for such future. Thank you.